The Swiss central bank posts biggest loss in its 116-year history. So, it's a sign of the times. Sign of the times. Brandon here. What's going on, guys? The Swiss National Bank expects a $143 billion loss for the 2022 financial year. The biggest loss in its 116-year history. Unreal. It represents the biggest loss in the central bank's 116-year history and equates to roughly 18%, almost one-fifth of Switzerland's projected gross domestic product. One-fifth. As a result, it will not make its usual payouts to the Swiss government and member states. It said, with payments to its shareholders also set to be affected. Huh, interesting. Shareholders. I thought these central banks and national banks, I thought they didn't have shareholders. That's very interesting. I thought it was like the people or something. Huh, interesting. Just wanted to highlight that, just so you could see that. Kind of like the Federal Reserve. It's not a federal institution. Doesn't have reserves. It's owned by, probably now, we don't know now, but it's owned by probably JP Morgan Chase, and all of the member banks out there, the commercial banks, have shares in there. Again, these are central banks started by the Rothschilds, namely probably the Warrens. Can't think of his name now, but many of these families over the last couple hundred years, the Rothschilds that had massive amounts of cash, like JP Morgan 100 years ago, coming in, bailing out banks, his own private wealth. So that's what these central banks are at the end of the day. Again, a news flash for anyone who didn't know, these are private entities with shareholders that are the ones controlling all the money flow of the world. Central banks are the governments. The President of the United States, that's just a figurehead. They don't have that much power. Yes, they have power to like declare war, things like that, but who do you think finances all this stuff? The central banks. They're the ones who give the green light at the end of the day. These are the things you don't see on TV. They're in the back rooms. They're in the meetings. They're at the Davos meetups, which is, I believe, going on soon. It's flying to Davos in their backroom late night martini parties and sipping their Manhattan. This is what's happening. This has been happening for decades, for hundreds of years. This is what Bitcoin was set out to dissolve and to take power from these, I don't know what you call them, autocrats, kleptocrats, the oligarchy. I don't know. I mean, you could throw a million terms at these people, but this is what's going on. The fact that the central banks were there to provide stable employment and to keep the interest rates level, things like that, and inflation not get out of control. Yet that's all that's happened. That's literally all that's happened. And again, Mike Maloney makes a great point. In 1920, 1921, there was the steepest deflation we've ever had in America, I believe, and it took a year to literally fix and correct itself in the free market because the central bank largely did nothing. However, when they got into the Great Depression, which is actually a slower deflation, we compounded the problem 100-fold with FDR, with all these collectivist ideas, trying to spray currency at the problem, crumb up all these federal programs that we're still living with today, all these entitlements, all these things that have contributed to the gut rot of America, and the people thinking they don't have to do anything and still get something. It took 20 years from 39, or was it 39 or 29, 29 to 54. That's the time it took for the stock market to get back to where it was. 25 years it took to get back to where it had been. Yet in 1920 and 21, we had a steeper deflation, a worse problem, a bigger depression. Yet we were able to rebound in a year or two and then have the roaring 20s. That just goes to show you, again, when you have central banks get themselves out of the way, which their whole sole purpose is to apparently provide stability and have these banks not crash, which again, shouldn't that tell you again, why are the banks there? The people don't know how to control their money. They're told to just give it to a bank, and then we can't have these banks crash because people's money's in there, but at the end of the day, they're just bailing out the unproductive class at the top who owns these banks. That's all it was for. It's all it's for at the end of the day. And then when the little banks do crash, they're just scooped up by the bigger banks. Again, kind of like the FDIC, the bank that we just showed the video the other day, the literal organization that's there to insure deposits, only has $125 billion to insure $9 trillion in assets. It's 1% of what it's supposed to be insuring. I mean, this is just comedy, absolute comedy. And Bitcoin fixes this. When you have a stable system with a predetermined monetary supply, you don't need central banks. You don't need 12 guys sitting in a room, all staring at each other, trying to, hey, John, what do you think? I don't know, Diane, what do you think? We don't need that. There's no point to have that. The Swiss National Bank raised interest rates for the third time in 2022 to 1%. Oh, look at you. That was counter inflation at 3%. Well, guys, just again, newsflash, you got to get above that to counter that. Well below the Eurozone's inflation rate of 10%, above 10%. Absolutely amazing. I thought this was fascinating too. They gained 400 million francs though through its gold holdings. Again, what have we been talking about for years? I mean, this is for 10 years. I've been doing Facebook Lives. I've been doing social media everywhere, talking about gold, silver, Bitcoin, food, energy, security, community, water, getting yourself prepared for what's coming. 2008, 97, the long-term capital management was kind of the beginning. 87 crash was kind of the beginning. Long-term capital management was another just kind of nail in the coffin. 01, and then you really had these massive bubbles come about because of stupid central bank policies. The Greenspan put Ben Bernanke, coming in and just putting the throttle down. Can't have deflation here. And 08 was really the end. And now the economy, the global economy, has just been on life support, and they've just been keeping it alive with massive QE, which is just currency printing and just typing digits into computers, buying bonds out of the market. By the way, buying from them out of the market, away from you and I, who are in the market as well. Pensions and 401ks, everyone's buying away, and giving zero return for savers, so crushing, especially older people in, any, pensions or anything like that is predicated on the bond market. Life insurance have all been struggling because you have governments in here and central banks destroying the currency and just up here bidding away the bond market away from everybody, driving rates lower. So we've done this to ourselves. We've let this happen. And how are the few of us, the 1%, the 5%, 10%, that are actually awake and actually see what's going on? What are we going to do to fix that? What are we going to do to combat that? Mind-blowing. I love this though. 400 million francs through its gold holdings. That's what's saving them. That's what's keeping them afloat somehow. While both central banks are structurally profitable, as they can remunerate their liabilities at a lower rate than the market. Interesting. Again, I love how they're above all. Does anyone ask why? Like, we've given them this power. Again, why? 100 years ago, they had to jam this through. This was not wanted. This was not wanted. In the same year, we had the income tax within the IRS as we did the Federal Reserve. This is not wanted. This was never wanted. They jammed this through right before Christmas again, the Federal Reserve Act at the end of 1913. And we still lived with it to this day. And everyone alive to this day has just grown with it their entire life and doesn't know any different. Or they say like it's 5 generations and then freedom's gone. Like, no one knows. No one's existed without having freedom or just not experiencing what actual free markets are. So no one knows. So like, no one even questions it now. It's just kind of like, well, it's just kind of like his life. Like, government just kind of runs everything for us. It just does everything. And you look at the late 1800s and early 1900s and the massive prosperity, building skyscrapers, building railways, oil companies, just everything that was being built, in the massive amount of growth we had, because it was unlimited. We had free banking. We had all these things going on without central banks. It was because we didn't have central banks that we were allowed to grow and people were allowed to flourish. And then all we have seen is the century of central banking. The last 100 years has been the century of war. Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq for 20 years, Vietnam for 20 years, the Korean War, the Cold War, World War I, World War II. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's beyond frustrating. It's beyond frustrating. So, what happens here? Swiss National Bank, they say, oh, we don't need a central bank digital currency though. So Greg Foss has been following this for a while, the Credit Suisse and stuff like that as well, what's happening there with Credit Suisse. Look at all these articles. Is Credit Suisse in trouble? Well, they're in big trouble. Is it going bust? From Forbes, The Street, The Motley Fool, and in massive trouble. Obviously, these people, because they're all derivatives. Everything's built on derivatives. It's just a financialization of the economy. No one's providing anything to anyone. It's just financially arbitraging, rates and yields. So again, lots of problems. Credit Suisse is a global investment bank there, and they all have problems right now, and that's because we've continually let these banksters just do and run wild, just do whatever they please. And this stuff is hilarious. Like, they don't need a digital currency. and they will. Like central banks are going to go central bank digital currencies on all of us. The one thing that's kind of curbing them in a way is one, technology. The governments don't know how to build central bank digital currencies. They don't know how to, we already have Bitcoin. We already have the global money that these people, ironically, have been trying and wanting for decades. We actually have the global money, but it's not in their hands, not in their control. That's why they're ticked off about it. So they're still trying to like do this thing. But it's like, I thought you guys wanted a global money. Well, now we have it, but it's not controlled by anyone. It's controlled by no one, and everyone's equal. And it's an equal playing field, not equal outcomes, but equal playing field. You have to provide value. Actually, you can't just arbitrage things and rent seek. You actually have to provide value when you live on a Bitcoin standard to get more Bitcoin. And these people don't like that. They don't like being able to not control you, to not freeze you out of the system. But this is coming. The one thing that's holding them back, though, is that the commercial banks, they are the middlemen. They're the ones that create all the currency. Long story short, they're the ones, and if you follow George Gamm and stuff like that, he goes through, hundreds of hours of explaining these, whiteboarding these, Jeff Snyder and everybody, and how the central banks are in cahoots with the commercial banks. The commercial banks are the ones that print, all the paper, quite honestly, with their fractional reserve lending and then creating currency through that process. Anyway, that's the one thing holding it back, because the commercial, central bank digital currencies basically kind of cut out that middleman. There's just a bank account at the Fed or at the central bank. So you have the people and then straight to the Fed. In the commercial banks, there's already been letters from different bankers being like, whoa, central banks, like, slow down. Like, we got to talk about this central bank digital currency. So you had this really interesting like triangle of the people, commercial banks, and the central banks, and like who's got power and who's got what. Bitcoin, ironically, again, has already figured that dilemma out, that trilemma. The people have the power. So you have the node runners, and then the people owning the token, and then the miners. And this fight was already won by the people and the nodes and the people running and saying, no, we don't want what the miners. The miners tried to collude. The block size wars 6 years ago. Tried to collude with some of the wealthiest people in the system and the miners, and they tried to collude, change the Bitcoin block size and change the code, if you will. And the node said, nope, we're not running that version. The people said, no, we're not running that. We're not doing that. And they ultimately had to capitulate to the people. The people showed we have the power. That's why Bitcoin is working in El Salvador. That's why it's working in Africa, in Nigeria, and the e-Naira, the central bank digital currency, has no less than 0.5% adoption rate, but yet Bitcoin has like 30-40+% adoption rate with young kids, things like that, because people see it. People that are in actual need actually see what Bitcoin is and what it's going to do. So these are the fights coming, but I want us to be prepared for what's coming. Get prepared, get resilient, start understanding the Bitcoin ecosystem and the parallel economy. It literally is. Would have helped in Cyprus. If Cyprus, I saw people talking about Cyprus on one of Mark Moss's videos. Cyprus gold didn't help people. People couldn't transact, couldn't send it across the other side of the country, things like that. Bitcoin does it. It's a complete system outside of everything. If you have an internet connection, you're good. You're good to go, and you can transact. It's outside these government currencies. It's outside. It's not physical like gold and silver, where you got to like carry the bar over to someone else. You can divide it, unlike a bar of gold, infinitely divisible. Everything. So this is a new world we're in, where Bitcoin literally takes power away from these people, and then puts it back in the hands of you. End of story. So I don't know. That's what gets me excited more than anything. I don't know. Like I said, price is the least interesting thing. Like right now there's a price, but eventually there won't be a price of Bitcoin. It'll just be everyone just works and earns Bitcoin. There won't be any Bitcoin left to like get from miners on an exchange necessarily. So like you're not buying those other currencies won't exist. You don't just go in there to like buy currency. People think of it wrong. They think like, I'm going to go buy this asset, or I'm going to buy this investment. I'm going to buy this. No, it's just money. Like we don't think about buying dollars. We just earn dollars. We have to live on dollars right now. Well, that will be Bitcoin someday. It's not going to be like, I live on dollars. No, I live on Bitcoin, the truest, soundest money humans have ever discovered. Appreciate you guys. Thank you for your time and energy. It's the most important asset we have. Like we said, it's the only finite one we have, like Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is time, and time is Bitcoin. It's not financial advice. It's freedom advice. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Please let me know what you would like to see here, what you don't like. We'll battle it out in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.